In 2001, the world was blessed with one of the best action RPGs ever made. A game that felt great to play and explore, didn't overstay its welcome, and even had an enjoyable and engaging story. This game had a sequel, delivered to us by the great folks over at Black Isle Studios in the year of our Lord 2004. Does the sequel live up to, or even surpass, the original? I guess we'll find out. I feel like a new man. No, a better man, after finishing this game. I'm now qualified to let you know exactly what's cool and not cool about this game, and it only took me 18 months to do it. We'll see how well that figure ages by the time I finish editing this video. Let's get into it. Shortly after the release of the first Dark Alliance, Interplay Entertainment announced that if the game was successful, a sequel would quickly enter development. And sure enough, in spring of 2003, Dark Alliance 2 was officially announced, as well as the new additions they were planning on adding. These included item crafting, 5 playable characters, and character-specific side quests. The game was initially set for an October 2003 release date, but development suffered some rather bureaucratic difficulties. As is the downfall of most things, money was the primary issue here. Interplay had a dispute with their then publisher, Vivendi Universal Games, claiming that they had refused to release payments to Interplay that they felt were owed to them. This delay was eventually resolved, and Interplay then announced that Dark Alliance 2 would be delayed to early 2004. But this was just the beginning of Interplay's problems around this time. Late in 2003, reports claimed that Black Isle Studios was shut down by Interplay. Interplay, of course, denied this, claiming that Black Isle Studios remains open with projects pending. However, news also broke that Black Isle's director had quit, that the studio was placed under management of another studio, and that Interplay was several millions of dollars in debt, none of these being good signs for the future. At this stage, Black Isle Studios had several games already in active development, including Fallout 3, not that one,
I'm hungry,
and Dark Alliance 3. Neither of these games would be released. Dark Alliance 3 was cancelled because Interplay failed to keep the license to the Dungeons & Dragons label from Wizards of the Coast, and they also fired all but 2 members of the team working on Fallout 3. There may have been other factors going into that one though. But wait, there's more. Snowblind Studios, a dev team who worked on the first Dark Alliance and even created the Dark Alliance engine, filed a lawsuit against Interplay, alleging that they had used the Dark Alliance engine in several games without their permission and withheld royalties from them. The lawsuit ended up settling in an agreement wherein Interplay would transfer the Baldur's Gate trademark to Atari, temporarily transfer the Dark Alliance trademark to Snowblind, and that Interplay could no longer use the Dark Alliance engine in future titles. Even with all the turmoil surrounding the studios in charge of Dark Alliance 2, the game did eventually release on January 20th, 2004 in North America. Dark Alliance 2 adds many new mechanics and gameplay elements that were not present in the first game. Perhaps the largest change being the selection of characters to choose from at the start of the game. You do not play as any of the protagonists from the first game, but we'll get into that later.
Wait a minute, what does that mean? What are you saying? Are you saying what I think you're saying? Is something gonna happen?
Rob, what?
I didn't say that.
Oh, Jesus, what have I gotten myself involved with here?
Each character has their own motivations, backstory, and set of skills they are proficient in, making the choice of character matter more significantly than in the first game, adding a nice sense of depth. There are many more NPCs to interact with in Dark Alliance 2. They can be found both inside and outside of buildings in the main hub area. Some just give you lore elements, which is cool, but depending on which character you selected at the start, some can give you character-specific side quests that you can complete for more XP or special items. And of course, our favorite shopkeeper makes a return, with an expanded selection and a new workshop feature. The workshop allows characters to break down and customize weapons and armor, increasing the stats of a particular item. This is done by combining your chosen item with runestones and gems. It's actually a fairly complex system, but I'll do my best to summarize it briefly. To increase the stats of an item, at least one runestone must be added. Gems are optional, but expand the item's stat increase even further. Gems have their own attributes that they add to an item. For example, when added to a weapon, pearls give the item a +1 improved critical. You are able to attach 2 types of gems to an item, but you cannot have more gems than you have runestones attached. So if you have 4 runestones, you can only have 4 gems. An important factor to keep in mind during this process is the item's base quality. There are 8 possible quality types, ranging from shoddy to flawless. Each carries its own base stat increase. You are better off upgrading a flawless weapon than a fine weapon. This system allows you to create a wide variety of items to suit your playstyle, and was definitely a welcome addition. To get the most out of this new system, I recommend reading through this comprehensive guide that I have linked in the description. It goes further into depth on how to create optimal gem combinations to suit whatever playstyle you are aiming for. And that's about it for the large-scale additions to Dark Alliance 2. The core gameplay loop feels very similar to the original, but that isn't to the game's detriment. The story and campaign of Dark Alliance 2 is a very entertaining, sprawling narrative, and also happens to contain my biggest problems with the game. Here I will walk you through the main progression points of the story, and explain what issues I feel it has. I won't be covering each and every plot point, but we'll go over the most important pieces. If you have not played the game for yourself, I implore you to do so, as it really is a worthwhile experience, and I would hate to spoil it for you. However, if you have already played it, or just don't care to do so at this point, don't let me stop you. The story begins where the previous game left off, as you witness the protagonist from the first game captured by this game's main antagonist, Mordok. This new villain is a vampire lord who explains directly to the previous protagonist that he plans on rebuilding the Onyx Tower, making their plight in the first game nothing more than a minor setback. With the intro sequence over, you are introduced to one of the new protagonists you chose at the start, or two if you're playing in co-op. I chose to play as the dwarf, just look at that monocle. Your first quest is to save a village from a group called the Red Fang Marauders. Upon freeing villagers from their captors, you are introduced to Randala, a caravan leader who hires you as one of her bodyguards on the way back to Baldur's Gate. She becomes your main source for quests during this early phase of the game. You are then given a cutscene where Zanhast, Mordok's henchman, explains he has interrogated their new prisoners, who only know that Eldrith was using the Onyx Tower to create shadow gates. Mordok explains that Karn's employers, the Zentarum, used the previous protagonist to seize power from Eldrith, so that they could use the power of the Onyx Tower for themselves. Mordok then elaborates that the tower would better serve him and his allies in the east, and thus a power vacuum is established, and the main conflict is a race to see who can claim the tower for themselves. Perhaps the most interesting revelation here is that Karn was never killed, and that he was never actually working for Xantum in the first game, but was actually hired to eliminate him. I really like the decision here to bring Karn back, and to elevate his status from more than just a thief, to a more prominent player in the larger narrative. It makes his character much more dynamic and interesting. As you arrive in the city of Baldur's Gate, Randala explains that there have been a series of kidnappings and murders, and gives you a choice on which to investigate first. I chose to investigate the murders first, which brings you to Bloodwire Manor, where sightings of distorted corpses have been reported. Inside the manor, you must find pieces of sheet music to play on a harpsichord near the main entrance to open a passage to the lower parts of the level. I'm not sure if it's because PSX2's sound emulation is wacky, or if it's actually supposed to sound like this, but the piece you play on the harpsichord really had me going for a minute. The level design here looks great, but the enemy variety leaves something to be desired. In the lower levels, you meet Luvia Bloodmire, who has been butchering and reforming corpses into Silent Hill-esque creatures. After destroying two of her latest creations, Luvia throws a fit and floods the manor with poison gas as she makes her escape.
Yeah, GG easy, knuckleheads!
You flee the manor and make your way back to Randala, who then tasks you with investigating the kidnappings, done by a smaller faction called the Hands of Glory, who capture victims and send high ransom requests to their families for release. This mission takes you to the warehouse, where the Hands of Glory have set up their operation. Similar to the last mission, you arrive at the destination, kill the guys, rescue the guys, kill the big guy, get the quest reward. The visual design here isn't as intriguing to me as the Bloodwire Manor, but the enemies are more varied in their combat styles, and were a lot more, dare I say, fun. You go back to Randala, who asks you to speak to the captain of the city guard for your next mainline quest. Additionally, you have the option to purchase a map to ruins in the Wood of Sharpteeth. I didn't find anything really interesting there though. It's basically an outdoor dungeon you have to pay for. Not that I'm complaining. I then spoke to the captain of the guard, who asks you to get rid of the Red Fangs who have been giving Baldur's Gate trouble for a while. You then travel to their lair to ruin their day. This dungeon has an enemy type I found to be very interesting. They're called rust monsters, and they only attack you if you have metal weapons or armor equipped, and will actually eat and destroy your equipment, which forces you to either use different types of equipment, or just remove your items in sections where they're around. At the end of this dungeon, you battle a boss clad in red armor, who flees after you deal enough damage to her. You are then given a cutscene where the boss you just defeated reports to her superior and explains her defeat. The superior, Lady Arogazia, throws a gamer fit,
Pope, seethe, maul,
and gives possibly the stiffest body slam I've ever seen. You travel deeper into the dungeon, entering a place called the Firewind Manor through a secret passage, eventually coming face to face with Arogazia, who welcomes you to the establishment before dropping you down a false floor in a very Mario 64 kind of way. You fight your way through the manor, eventually stumbling across a large room where Arogazia and Karn are seen. You are given the choice to either eavesdrop on the conversation or interrupt it. Either way, the outcome is the same, but the choice itself is better than nothing, I suppose. Karn and Arogazia discuss their plans to take the Onyx Tower for the Zentarum, and briefly mention your meddling in the affair. Arogazia explains that she is willing to destroy her home in order to keep you at bay, much to Karn's shock. If you choose to eavesdrop, she beckons you to speak after Karn departs, explaining that your efforts have been fruitless, as she has moved her treasure and plans to bring the house down in a very literal sense, before turning into a dragon. Instead of fighting her though, she begins to destroy the building around you, forcing you to flee. You report back to Randala and explain the situation, prompting her to send you to meet Jarek, a guy who was in the first game and a member of the Harpers. And this ends Act 1 of the story. Act 2 begins with another cutscene featuring Mordok and the other guy. Zanhast explains that the Zentarum have been fed the required information on how to reconstruct the tower, but the Harpers have moved in to intercept them. Mordok thinks this is a good thing, feeding the player some more exposition about how he holds the last remaining Shadow Gate. I take a bit of issue with scenes like this one, but I'll get into that later. Back in Baldur's Gate, you meet with Jarek, who explains that you must gather some artifacts that he intends to collect. The first he sends you to get is the Orb of Thunder, but he's not forthcoming about why you really need to do this, only explaining that it is not for a nefarious purpose. You make your way to the outside of a place called Liran's Hold to start this fetch quest. You are given a cutscene after venturing a bit further through the level featuring our boy Slavos, the lizard man who helped out the protagonist from the first game, and Karn. Slavos explains that he has been tracking you, and knows what you are after. Karn instructs Slavos to take the orb before you do. You enter the main area of Liran's Hold, a very visually appealing level with a variety of interesting enemies to fight, including furniture. Deeper into the hold, you find Liran's study, which is barred from the front but has a secret entrance somewhere else. Upon entering the study, you are given a cutscene featuring Liran himself, who congratulates you for finding the entrance to the study, before letting you know that he is going to kill you. He cannot be damaged by your weapons, and will follow you around dealing damage if you let him get too close. But a scroll in the study explains that you must find his remains and destroy them, to banish Liran. This boss fight was different in a good way, forcing the player to remain mobile, and destroy a set of pottery to defeat Liran. I found it to be a really fun departure from the norm. After the fight, you of course travel to the observatory and take the orb, but Slavos meets you atop the observatory and implores you to release the orb to him, citing the fact that the protagonist from the first game didn't fare so well after working for Jarek. Unfortunately, this culminates in a battle with Slavos, and after his defeat, you travel back to Baldur's Gate to return the orb. You let Jarek know that the Zentarum are aware of your movements, and are working to impede your progress. Jarek doesn't seem too terribly bothered by this, but offers to give you hazard pay in response. Jarek lets you know that there are 4 artifacts in total. The ones you need to collect next are the Jade Octahedron, the Brazier of Eternal Flame, and the Oceanic Urn. In the interest of time, I won't be completely covering the quest to collect these items, but each of these quests have small sub-stories and a handful of NPCs to interact with, altogether being pretty cool, but don't feature characters like Karn and Slavos to tie the quest as neatly into the main story. The last item to collect, the Oceanic Urn, is taken from you before you can make it back to Baldur's Gate. You must travel to the town of Hill's Edge to steal the urn back before it is placed in the hands of the Zentarum. You take the urn back and slaughter the group that stole it from you, altogether being a very minor setback. With all items now gathered, Jarek asks to meet you in Omduel's Manor, ending Act 2 of the story.
Let's get back to it.
Much like Act 2, Act 3 opens with another Mordok cutscene, where he is told that the Harpers are in control of the 4 objects you collected, apparently falling in line with Mordok's plan.
Ah, everything is falling into place so neatly. A little too neatly, perhaps.
They then prepare to activate the Onyx Heart. In Baldur's Gate, Jarek explains the real threat that the Onyx Tower possesses. The Onyx Tower is a massive multi-dimensional gate, which has the ability to move itself, and to create smaller portals that link to one another outside of the tower. Eldrith intended to use the portals to move her troops into Baldur's Gate, and the Zentarum intend to use it to expand the reach of their network. Jarek states that this cannot be allowed to happen, and that you must either seal or destroy the tower. All this culminates in quests that take you to 4 elemental planes to activate the tower's 4 elemental foundations, and the 4 objects you have already collected can do just that. After this is done, the Harpers will be able to enter the tower's core and claim it for themselves. Omduel has the ability to transport you to these planes: air, earth, fire, and water. Again, in the interest of time, I won't be completely covering all 4 of these planes. But they all begin with cutscenes featuring Karn begging the 4 boss characters at the end of each plane to please stop you from activating the elemental foundations. 2 of these characters you have met previously, and 2 you have not. The air boss was by far my favorite though.
There must have been 50, no, 100 men. Well, I could have easily handled them, but they took me by surprise. Give me 200 soldiers and I'll go and take back the Air Foundation. I promise you.
While a time-consuming process, the levels you traverse here were pretty fun, and honestly I didn't take much issue with this part of the game. But I understand if others find the process redundant. With all the foundations active, you travel back to Jarek, but this time, Karn just shows up for a chat. He offers to actually help you defeat Mordok after it is clear that the Zentarum won't be able to take control of the tower. This puts an end to Act 3, as you prepare for the final push for the tower. Act 4 opens with yet another Mordok cutscene. The Onyx Heart has been activated, and the plan to move the Onyx Tower has been set into motion. You and the boys, Jarek and Karn, travel to Mordok's keep to confront him directly. At different points in the keep, Jarek and Karn leave your company to keep enemies at bay while you proceed further. Karn even saying that you will have to meet again one day. In the dungeons of the keep, you find the protagonists from the first game, held captive in cells. You activate a series of levers and open the cells that they are in. The first person you free gives you access to a special item of theirs, found in one of the sarcophaguses in the surrounding area. Not knowing this part at first, I freed the archer and got access to his bow. But since my character was entirely built on two-handed weapons, I had to reload a save later on and rescue Cromlech the dwarf first, getting access to his frankly OP axe. Face to face with Mordok for the first time at the end of the keep level, he first offers to recruit you as one of his allies, offering you eternal life, which of course you decline. He actually has a cool line here.
I should have known. You have a stubborn look about you. So let it never be said that I was cruel or without chivalry. I offered you my hand, and you spurned it.
After dealing enough damage to him, he flees to the top of the keep to speak with Zanhast, stating that now is the time to move the tower to Baldur's Gate, even though they aren't as prepared as they would like to be. The tower then appears in the middle of Baldur's Gate, creating a scene of chaos. Back in the city, you have a conversation with our boy Bartley, who unsurprisingly is still willing to have you part with your gold for some equipment. Meeting with Randala outside of the tower, it is revealed that she has been compromised by Zanhast. Kind of a cool plot point, which leads to a battle. After your victory, she comes back to her senses and urges you to press onward and succeed. Inside the tower, you get a cool throwback to the first game, as the layout inside is very similar to how it was, with the same enemy types present. I really enjoyed that. After scaling the tower, you come face to face with Zanhast, who is very pleased to see you. He says he plans to add you to his harem, which gave me a lot of bad vibes. But this fight was pretty par for the course, with Zanhast able to stun the player in place and gain a little bit of health if you get too close. A reasonable leap in difficulty from what came before, but left me woefully unprepared for what was to come next. With Zanhast defeated, you have to fight Mordok again, and dear god I had so much trouble with this fight. I had some frame rate issues because I was playing on an emulator. But that's honestly my fault, not the game's, although this wasn't a big factor for me up to this point. In this fight, he is split into two entities, one standard enemy and one shadow guy. When close enough to the shadow entity, he can gain an insane amount of health and drain yours, which left me endlessly frustrated with my inability to keep his health down. Playing solo, I didn't have another player around to shift focus away from me, so I was dealing with the brunt of his damage while also trying to inflict more damage than he gained. It may just come down to my own skill not being adequate enough, but keep in mind I've gotten through the rest of the game up to this point with relative ease. I also felt as though some of my hits didn't register when they really should have, but that could also be down to my slow emulation. The most effective way I found to deal damage to him was to just get him out of range of the shadow entity so he could not regain health as quickly. You have the opportunity to destroy the shadow, but it respawns pretty quickly, and while not focusing on Mordok himself, it leaves you more open to his ranged and stun attacks. So I ended up finishing the fight by keeping him to one section of the arena and whittling away at him until he died. It may have been pretty cheap on my end, but a guy's gotta do what a guy's gotta do, you know? With Mordok and the tower destroyed, you were congratulated by Randala, who was granted her life back after Zanhast's defeat. And this ends the story in Dark Alliance 2. The only place I feel Dark Alliance 2 suffers is in its story. It isn't terrible, far from it, but I feel it treads a lot of the same ground as the first game, albeit much expanded in scope, with the campaign taking you through progressively more treacherous dungeons, finding a boss more menacing than the last, until you finally confront the main antagonist atop the Onyx Tower. The formula itself isn't the issue here though. What I feel muddies the experience a bit are these strange, often abruptly injected cutscenes you get every act featuring Mordok and his right-hand man. Seeing the main villain of the story this early and frequently, often over-explaining his plans and intentions, removes a lot of the mystery and intrigue I feel the first game had with its main antagonist. Eldrith was a villain you didn't hear a lot about until the last act of the first game, but you knew through the whole journey that there was a greater and more sinister force behind every obstacle you overcame, and the payoff you received at the end felt much more grandiose than what you get at the end of this game, at least in my opinion. I'm not saying I have a perfect solution, but I feel they could have gotten some of that intrigue back by portraying Xanhast as a greater antagonist who reported to Mordok in a way that shrouded Mordok's appearance and explicit intentions. Kind of like how Karn reported to Xantum in the first act of the last game, not revealing that Xantum was a beholder until very late in that questline. And while not necessarily a fault with this game, there are many aspects of the larger story that remain open even after Mordok is defeated and the game comes to a close. It's just as he said in your first encounter with him.
Are you so naive, thinking this all some storybook cliche? That with me defeated, all will be right with the world?
The intention was to have a third game in the series, which would have presumably brought these open-ended plot points to a close. But since this entry never came, there are a few aspects of the story that leave the player wanting. Specifically your interactions with Karn, an enemy you thought you killed in the first game, turned an unlikely ally toward the end of the campaign, but one that leaves your company and mentions that you will have to meet again someday. Additionally, the final cutscene features Mordok's previously mentioned allies in the east, learning of Mordok's defeat in Baldur's Gate, but this wouldn't really lead anywhere for the same reason. Dark Alliance 2 gives you more of the great gameplay that people loved about the first game, with an assortment of great new features and characters to elevate the game to new heights. With the first game getting a new release on consoles recently, I sincerely hope that the sequel gets the same treatment. While I had some issues with the story, that doesn't mean that everyone will, and I hope this game gets into the hands of players who haven't yet had the chance to experience it. I think that the chances of a faithful continuation of the story is out of the cards at this point, but luckily what we do have is a really good time.